Are you gonna miss it?
Yeah, I will.
She told
I definitely will.
I'm sorry. You're funny, like, because that's where I'm like, the whole thing's on my side. Like, why am I supposed to be leaving this? That would be a pleasure. Why do I care about what this person thinks? Wow.
And move this to get it out of here.
I don't read the end. Work, I thought, oh, that's funny. Have patience. Oh, good picture for all his vanity.
Okay. Huh?
I like the kids' Bible in there because I like their little, their thoughts. I like it. My daughter was driving that mom's car, and that told me to black ice. We said, no.
Okay, should we get started?
That was my new Bible, I can write it.
Yeah.
Okay, since we're running late today, let's go ahead and get to work, and whoever just trickles in because we need to make sure we get done before 11, we've got about an hour. So let's start with a word of prayer, and then let's take a look at, my plan is to look at chapters 6 and 7 today. So we're just going to focus on 2 chapters, and we're going to unpack a couple really interesting passages and some things that he has to say in this. So let's start with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to come together and discuss your word and to hear what you may be saying through Kohelet, and just in terms of the things that he has to say that maybe, I know that some of his words are distressing, but I pray that you will help us to listen to the wisdom that he has to offer us. And I pray that you will help us to just step back and breathe and just listen to what the passage has to say. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're going to look at, last week we took a look at 3 chapters. Here we're only going to deal with 2, and I just want to let you all know we do not have Sunday school next week because Sarah and I are going to be out of town. So just be aware of that. We're going to look at 6 and 7 today, and why don't we start with just 6? Because 6 is only 12 verses. So I figured let's just get those read and on the table. Who would like to read for us before we start our discussion? Go ahead, John. Yeah, 6, 1 through 12.
There is an evil which I have been under the sun that lies heavy upon humankind, to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they may lack nothing of all that they desire. Yet God does not enable them to enjoy these things, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity, it is not grievous ill. A man may beget 100 children and live many years, but however many are the days of his service, he does not enjoy less good things or has no burden. I say that children from the child is better off than he, for it comes in vanity and goes in darkness and comes in darkness. His name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun nor anything. Twice over and Jordan to good, not go in peace. All human toils are now, yet the appetite is not satisfied. But what advantage is the wise over the fools? And who do the poor who have know how to conduct themselves besides the sight of the living? Better is the sight of the eyes and the wanting of a desire of both and chasing after wind. Whatever his name has come has already been named, and it is known that both human beings and that they are not able to disfigure him for which they are stronger. The more words, the more vanity, how much is the better. For one knows that he is good for mortal, and they live in the few days of their vain life, which they can pass like a shadow. For whom can we tell them what will be out of them under the sun?
Thanks, John. Ooh, there's a lot going on here in this passage. So first impressions, as we just let this one wash over us here real quick, what sticks out to you? What details jump out for chapter 6?
It's the wealth, but not the. Well, maybe not the ability to enjoy it, but that's for us to do,
Hmm.
and we don't always.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that thought in just a second. Good. So what else, what other details jump out at you? Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
I just been reading a lot
Mhm,
about the role of gratitude in life,
mhm.
and I guess that's because I've been reading that, it just kind of pops out at me.
Okay.
All of it is. There will be no enjoyment if you don't have the gratitude.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good. Any other thoughts?
Well,
Yeah, because I heard you across the room thinking, so go ahead.
well, you know, I see a parallel between what this passage is saying and like what science, behavioral scientists are saying about the negative effects of like Facebook and social media. And the image of the perfect life and the rest of us struggling to atone, you know, to assimilate it, and yet there's no such thing. And anyway, I don't know, it seems to be, I mean, there's a lot of truth to this, really. You know, I go back to an interview I saw of oh gosh. Sylvester Stallone,
Mhm.
and he said he's seen life at all sides, from very poor to very rich. He said the people who are happiest seem to be in the middle.
Mhm.
The poor are unhappy because they lack the basic necessities. And the rich seem to be unhappy because they bang their heads on the ceiling of human experience.
Right.
And this seems to corroborate that.
Yeah, and especially what he has to say about the enjoyment of wealth in particular seems to line up with that. But there's also a running theme through other passages that talk about moderation in things. And that makes, I think that sneaks in here a little bit in chapter 7. We're gonna see that idea pop up. But I mean, that's something my mother used to tell me when I was growing up, was, you know, moderation in all things, and like see. The social sciences, we've found that people tend to be happiest when they're making somewhere in the neighborhood of around $70,000 a year. You go a little higher than that and their happiness drops off. You go a little bit lower than that, their happiness drops off pretty significantly. But there is evidence suggesting if you picked up on some of those studies that have been done, I mean, that is the story that we keep seeing. Are there any, oh, yeah, go ahead.
The first.
About that evil here for a second. What does Kohelet say the evil is in these verses? What is the evil that lies so heavy on us?
Wealth, possessions, and honor.
Okay, so wealth, possessions, and honor, is that everything?
I don't know if you go back to the Garden of Eden, what was the evil there? It was to want to be like God. I don't know, this
Sure,
desire to be in control and to be
sure.
in charge of everything.
Yeah, but that's more general. I think that he's aiming us specifically at something particular here.
Yeah, you can have everything, but you not have the ability to enjoy it.
Right.
That's the evil.
Yeah, and it's so those to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, they lack nothing of all that they desire, yet God does not enable them to enjoy these things.
But a stranger enjoys them.
Yeah, but a stranger enjoys them. So somebody else ends up getting all the stuff that we worked so hard for. We've mentioned this a few times in here, right? We mentioned this last week too. When you die, what happens to your stuff? Right? Where does it end up going?
All over the place.
Goodwill, the garbage, right? Okay,
Somebody else's story.
somebody else's story, right? And again, like the story that I told about the mustache cups, which someone threatened to or you sent me a link to like mustache cups.
I saw it online.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, massive laugh out of that. Thank you. That was a joy. And I haven't, I report mustache cup front that I have not yet received one in the mail, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Okay, so let's just stop here for a second because we talk about, and man, the Bible spends so much time talking about wealth, possessions, and what we do with them. Jesus spends a lot of time talking about giving possessions away. There are parables that talk about, rich men building barns to store all the wealth, and then in the end, their lives are demanded of them, right? Like, is it bad to have things? Is just the act of owning an object or like buying a TV, is that a sin in and of itself?
No.
No, and I don't know, I don't even know if Jesus would really say it would be much of a sin, right? What's the problem? When does it become problematic?
You aren't satisfied with it and you don't appreciate it.
Good, you aren't satisfied with it?
The
You don't appreciate
possessions become the goal, not the enjoyment of life that they are supposedly to
Right.
provide.
Right, that's a good third thing to be, there's more than one right answer here, gang, so keep them coming.
I feel like it's our culture that says we need the latest and the great, I mean, that's
Yeah.
all of advertising. If I have this phone, I need the upgraded phone, I need
Mhm.
the upgrade. So the desire, this is the verse that stood out to me. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire.
Yeah.
And to not see and appreciate,
Mhm.
and still think you still are desiring the next.
Yeah.
The next step, the next.
Right, so again, a lack of satisfactions here. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when the striving for possessions or stuff management takes over our time and ability to connect with others, to love our neighbors.
Kind of like having a garden.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I also like, okay, one, I appreciate the appeal to gardening too. I like that you use the term stuff management.
I call it that.
I think it's completely and totally accurate.
I think in tying with that
Mhm.
is we become slaves to that which we have.
Right.
That's,
Mhm. Yeah, it's very fair. So, what was the next one? And again, it's important to note who the giver of wealth is here, and also who doesn't allow people to enjoy it. So who is being blamed here? Yeah, again, just a reminder, Kohelet's not the most cheerful person. Kohelet is definitely angry at God, and we do have to deal with that anger here. And like we talked about last time, and especially with some of the questions at the end of the study guide, this is not anger coming from an agnostic or an atheist. This is coming from a person who is a believer. So I do, again, want to tip the hat to it as it sort of passes us on by here right at the beginning of this. But we also have to hold what he has to say in context with the larger witness of scripture about who God is. We talked about that a little bit last week as well. So again, some of those recurring themes are popping back up.
I think a lot of the theology in the Old Testament though identifies the fact that God is the one who does everything.
Yes,
Whether
that's
it's
correct.
life or death or heaven or hell.
Right.
God is always the one who does it
Yes.
all.
Yeah, it's
Now, our thinking is not that way.
correct, because we tend to divorce God from, so we even see this in the book of Job. So
Yeah.
there is you see this in Lamentations, certain Psalms. How many of you have read Psalm 88 recently?
Oh,
It's
I'm sure I have, but I.
the only psalm that does not have a positive resolution, that just has all complaint. And sometimes when you take certain books of the Old Testament, especially when you're grouping Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, Job, certain complaint psalms, there's a name that scholars use for that sometimes, and they call it the counter testimony. If the testimony of Israel is all the good things that God did, the counter testimony is the people's complaints about all the hardships that they endured and trying to wrestle with the nature of why did all these bad things happen to us? And what does that say about God? And this very much fits in with that grouping of those counter testimonial books. It's the attempt to try to understand the problem of evil and what that tells us about who God is. Again, the name for that is a theodicy, right? So, okay, what was the other question? Who's better off than a person who can't enjoy their possessions? This is a very dark answer. I mean,
Still orange.
yeah. No, that's okay, and that's okay. Like, he says some stuff that is not pleasant in this book. Why? Okay, so if we put ourselves in Kohelet's shoes, why do you think he's appealing to a stillborn child here? Like, why make this really dark statement?
That child will never see
Right.
reality of the world that
Yeah,
would have been born into,
I think that's a pretty good answer for that. Yeah, that's really solid.
which is the only way I can handle the thought of abortion.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, I hate a child who doesn't see life.
Mhm.
I hate the fact that someone's life is taken.
Mhm.
But I think that's where when I relate to that, it's a child does not see.
Right. And again, according to this, that child would be better off than a person who was born. Right. Right. So this, gosh, like, let's pause for a second and think about this. A baby who is never born is better off than we are. It is better off than a person who is given wealth and has no ability to experience it. How do you feel about that? Does it ring true? You think he's being too extreme here? Again, this is a grisly thought, but it's worth pausing for just a second. This is also are we doing okay? I'm just checking in. This is a mental health wellness check here, just to make sure we're all right.
Extreme.
Pretty extreme?
He's making a point.
Yeah, yeah.
Real hard.
A very hard point. Is there any truth in this point?
For some people in some time and some place. And then see through.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
I was going back to like my thought about if you had people, like if you were an African American enslaved in this country and you were reading this and knowing what you were going through as an enslaved person with no hope of being free, I mean, I can understand where that might be viewed as a blessing.
Yeah, that's fair.
And yet, that enslaved person often, anyway, not always, I'm sure, look toward heaven as that answer.
Right.
Whereas this guy doesn't see that as.
Yes, and I believe Kohelet's looking at heaven, but the looking is with anger. For sure, there is definitely a vibe of blame accusation here in this. You go ahead, I can hear you thinking.
I
I
was,
can hear you thinking too, I'll come over to you in just a second.
some things just come up in readings I'm doing. One of them is by an author, Madeline Lennon.
Mhm.
And I read this and it was like, I just was shocked. She said, I hate you, God,
Mhm.
love Madeline.
Right,
And I'm going, sometimes that's how our communication feels.
Right.
I'm honest. If everything comes from God, which of course,
Mhm.
some of the scripture bases sound like that.
yeah,
To me, that is that honesty, but I'm still in relationship.
right,
I'm a believer, but
yes.
today this is how I feel.
Yeah, and thank you, because that's kind of what I mean. So. Let's stop here for just a second and ask it an incredibly important question. Is it okay to be angry at God?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can handle that.
yes. Precisely.
I didn't hear that.
He can handle it.
Yeah.
God can handle it.
I mean, just look at the Psalms.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Over
yes,
and over again.
yes. I get one of my, probably my all-time favorite psalm is Psalm 73, which starts with, surely the Lord is good to Israel, those who are pure in heart, but as for me, my feet had almost slipped when I saw the prosperity of the wicked, and that he spends all his time, it's like, God, why are they so successful? Their bodies are healthy, their bodies are strong, they do not strip, their feet don't stumble at all whatsoever, everything goes right for them, why? And then like in the middle of it, he's like,
Yeah.
surely in vain I have washed my hands in innocence. In vain I have kept my heart pure. And then he has a moment where he has the come to Jesus experience of, but if I had spoken like this, I would have ignored the kindness to, right, so he comes back and he reconciles with God in the end of it. But this is a moment where we're like, in a lot of ways, that Ecclesiastes is the first half of Psalm 73. Or it's Psalm 88, where there is no resolution. But the thing that I love about this, and the way that especially Jewish tradition handles that, is they don't sweep it under a rug. They validate it by putting it in here. And that is something that's part of the reason I was both like, I don't know how this is gonna go, and also excited to teach Ecclesiastes, because that's honestly, that is the heart and soul of this book. Is I want you all to have the room to be angry at God and to understand that you're not alone. Like when I've been reading Peter Enns' commentary on all of this stuff, I have really been wrestling with all of this. And Peter has this really beautiful conclusion, because this is part of the Two Horizons series of commentaries that tries to, the Two Horizons are, one, you understand the book as it was written for the people at the time. Two, you look at it through the lens of a cross. And you look backwards at it to see how it fits in with Christian testimony, right? And this is what Peter has to say about the whole book. For Kohelet, God poses a very practical problem. Life, Kohelet says, is absurd. His observations lead him to question and even accuse, like in this passage right here, God of setting up a no-win situation. You cannot count on wisdom to come through from day to day, and death assures that at any moment of success, it will be seen from the fleeting folly that it actually is. These thoughts, however distressing they may be, are familiar to all who have ever tried to understand their suffering in the context of their faith in a wise and just God. Rather than shaming such sufferers for their lack of faith, the Bible itself, in places like Ecclesiastes, lets us know that our struggle is an old one and that we are not alone. And that by itself, I think, like, I needed to hear that. I really needed that. And that also helps me better understand why, when I come to Ecclesiastes, why when I read it, I feel such a moment of relief. It's like, oh, good. I'm not the only one. Does that make sense? You had something to say, okay, and I know, I heard you had a thought, and I just wondered,
No,
are you sure?
I'm good.
Yeah.
This goes back to two things that I think of. One, when we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, we were told we were gonna have to toil. Life isn't supposed to be easy, hello.
Right.
You know, and so these experiences are not mysteries. They're actually very, very simple in that regard.
Right.
Secondly, what this is really saying is you can't escape it. It says early on, the only one who has happiness is the one who is actually engaged in the toil.
Mhm.
You know, that
Right.
they receive
That you can find
satisfaction
happiness
from their work and whatnot, and engaging in life and being part of it. But make no mistake, it's fleeting.
Mhm.
I get that. I'm at ease with it. That means I'm just like everyone else.
Right. Yeah. I knew you had something to say.
And what that should prompt us to do is to be present when we can take joy in it, because it might not be there forever, so.
Yeah,
It does give you a sense of, not always looking for that feeling to be
Mhm.
around forever, but to take stock in when we do have it,
yeah.
Makes me excited for what comes next, though.
Yes, which if you look at the last bullet point under that thing, can we know what will happen after we are gone? Right? So I mean, it becomes a mystery for us in some ways to sort of see what comes up next for us and also what happens after we eventually do pass, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there's still a lot of mystery kind of mixed in here. And then it talks a bit about whether or not the wise have any advantage over fools in this passage. Does Kohelet think that there's any advantage to being wise over being foolish?
He says it in chapter 7, he talks about.
Right, and we're gonna get into that more here in the next couple of verses we'll look at. So that's gonna be an interesting point to see how he sort of covers that ground. Any final thoughts on chapter 6?
So are we forever cast on this yo-yo of biblical triumphalism on one hand
Mhm.
and despair on the other?
Right.
I don't know, does Jesus help mediate that at all?
Yes, I think so, and that would be. When I think about, and the thing that helps me reconcile this and help find a place for the counter testimony in my testimony. Is God's response to all of this. It wasn't like nowhere is Kohelet shamed. Right? Job was said after his long complaint against God, God sided with Job. And the Psalms, we still go back to those and they're still included as acts of worship. Even the complaint part is still act of worship. And the way that God, I believe, dealt with all of that was instead of saying, good luck, everybody, and just sort of waving at us as he sort of cosmically sails on by to the next planet, he became one of us. And he went through all of the same things that we go through.
I wish I could remember the name of the book I read here a few months ago. I think an Anglican woman, but it was a study of darkness
Mhm.
and the nuggets of light
Yeah,
that appear in darkness. And she did a really thorough job. It kind of helped me sort of lean into some of these sort of dark times as a
Yeah.
way through, a way toward light
Right.
even, and
right.
it was really wonderful.
And like in its early conception, our religion was a religion of suffering. Like it was about when we were going through this and we're wrestling with the meaninglessness of life, or we're going through pain or sick moments of suffering, we are communing with Jesus. And like we took communion today, right? And we are commemorating the breaking of his body and the shedding of his blood. We're not commemorating the happy, great party that he had with the disciples that one time when he turned all the wine into water. We're commemorating something painful, because I think that that's God's way of reminding us and talking to us and assuring us that I know that this is hard. I know that your life is going to be hard, that nobody gets out of this alive. Like everybody's going to suffer. I'm here. I'm going through it with you. I'm at the end of it. It's going to be okay. Does it help? Okay, cool. Who wants to take a look at chapter 7 and make it even weirder?
Somebody reading?
Sure, if you would love to. So could you just do verses 1 through 14? Because there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here.
The good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of everyone, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of countenance the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression makes the wise foolish, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. The patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. Do not be quick to anger, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is as good as an advantage of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to the one who possesses it. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, and in the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that mortals may not find out anything that will come after them.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff to unpack here, like. But let's start out with the very first verse. A good name is better than precious ointment, and that all sounds nice and proverbsy, right? Like a good reputation will help you, my son. But then he turns around and he says, the day of death is better than the day of birth. Look forward to the day you die. It's better than the day you were born. And then he just completely turns the whole thing on its head. And so when I was reading through the commentaries on this, they were like, oh, no, he's kind of making fun of the cadence of the book of Proverbs. And he's taking like the traditional folk. Like the day of death is better than the day of birth. What do you make of that statement? Is the day you die better than the day you were born? And if so, why?
Well, from the Christian standpoint, you're going,
Right. And again,
but they didn't have quite this.
correct, yeah. And that's the two horizons point of view, right? So we're over here, we are looking back on that and we're like, well, yeah, that makes sense because I get to meet Jesus. Awesome. But for his point of view,
Yeah.
what does he get out of that? It's just, I'm done. I don't have to deal with all of y'all anymore. I'm out. He just drops the mic and just dies happily. I'm like, no more life. Awesome. I get to tap out. What do you think?
Don't ask me.
Because I can see you have a thought, but you don't, okay.
So my dad has dementia. I just spent last Saturday with him in tears.
Mhm,
He's been a believer his whole life.
mhm.
He knows he's lost a lot of his mental function. He feels worthless and he
Yeah.
wants to die.
Mhm.
So when I read this,
Yeah,
I can't read it without having that lens in front of me.
and to be honest, that's actually a very valid way to interpret this. And I'm sorry about your dad. That sucks. But I think that's very close to what he's thinking. Is I don't have to deal with this ambiguity and this stress anymore. So when you're looking at death, there are some appealing benefits to it. And for people who have struggled with mental illness or certain forms of dementia, or certain mental conditions, death sounds very appealing. Because like, I don't have to deal with my dementia anymore. Like, if you've ever had someone who's in your family who struggles with dementia, there is a sense of sadness when they pass, but also an overwhelming sense of relief. So, I mean, I'm speaking from experience on that, so.
I guess I'm wondering also for those who commit suicide.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's a better thought too.
Yes, it is. And that's, I'm gonna try not to get too deep into the psychological literature on that. When you are in a very, very deep depression, the thought of going back through it or going back into that very low state, I mean, because we don't talk about this a lot, but depression has physical pain symptoms that accompany it. And have a higher level of energy and there's a concern about them relapsing, they may not want to relapse. So that's when they are at their highest risk for committing suicide. So. And we're only in the first verse of this chapter. We haven't even gotten into the rest of it yet. We're talking about. So let's dig a little deeper here. So if we take a look at verse hang on, the passages that go after this, like verse 2, it's better to go into the house of mourning than into the house of feasting. In verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter. In verse 4, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. What do you make of that? What do you make of those contrasts?
What is more likely to drive me to seek God or to be in communication?
Mhm.
It's easier in the easy times
Mhm.
to kind of let that go. Like, at least for my experience.
Hmm.
When I'm hurting is when I'm seeking or looking for, knowing my needing.
Sure. That's fair.
I think it's also in the difficult times is when we learn.
Mhm.
It's not in the happy-go-lucky times.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge for us. And anytime we are provided with some challenge or some difficulty, growth is how we get through it.
Mhm.
It's true. It's good. Any other thoughts?
Do we also get a sense of empathy when we go through those times in a way that we don't otherwise see it? That there are people that live in the muck all the time, and maybe part of our purpose is to get in the muck with them
Mhm.
instead of focusing on getting out of it or trying to leave it. I mean, I'm not saying that we should want to be sad all the time, but like, I think, but I mean, but does it remind us that there are some people who maybe don't have the ability to get out of there as much, and living there for a bit of time with them just brings a sense of empathy that we maybe otherwise wouldn't have.
I think that's really good too.
That's wondering, I think you hear of people who are going through something terrible, usually a health situation. And then they find out somebody else has gone through it and they can talk together.
Yeah.
It gives them courage and
Right.
strength.
Right. No, it very much does. Or like, when you have a loved one who's suffering from dementia, right? Talking about the people who've been through it too, like. So my grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and I remember I was watching my mom basically watch her mother deteriorate very slowly. And as we were grappling with that, we had to sort of teach ourselves how to find funny moments, and it helped to connect with other people who had been through that. And, you know, it's really, gosh, like, it's hard to explain when you watch someone going through that. I mean, when you're talking with another person who's seen that, like, the story that we always tell is when my mom bought her this body lotion that was like sugar cookie scented or something, like it's like the kind of stuff that you get at Bath Works that smells like candy, and you're like, gee, I kind of want to eat this. When you have dementia and you smell something that smells good, you do eat it. So she actually took the can and she ate the whole thing.
Oh my God.
Now, when I tell that story, people are like, oh, except for other people who have loved ones with dementia, and they laugh their asses off. The other option is just madness and heartbreak. Does that make sense? It's a really sad story about my grandmother struggling, but it's also a moment of lightheartedness that other people who've gone through that will get. Again, like you all are saying, so you just don't know what other people are going through unless you've been through it yourself. And if you get into this place of mourning with them, or well, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to mourn with those who are mourning, grieve with those who are grieving, and rejoice with those who are rejoicing, correct? And these are all invitations to empathy.
And that's actually what I think of when I think of Christmas, and that is Christ with us. As
Right.
opposed to being this authoritarian God.
Yes.
Put in the Old Testament, Christ came, and he is the one that said, let this cup pass away. He wasn't like signing on for it,
Mhm.
because it was gonna be
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that way is where I think the identity is I can give you something, it's very different than being.
Oh, very fair. Let's take a look next at, again, so these other verses here in the center of the passage. Especially, so 2 through 5 have a lot of that dichotomy about mourning versus joy, better to be with those who are mourn. Then it starts to talk about wisdom, like it begins with the crackling of thorns under a pot. And I heard Wayne, did you say popcorn? Okay, I thought I had heard someone say popcorn. So like the crackling of thorns under a pot, or the popping of kernels in the microwave, I suppose, is the laugh of fools. This also is vanity. And then he starts talking about wisdom, like surely oppression makes the wise foolish, and a bribe corrupts the heart. And then better is the ending of a thing than its beginning. The patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. Do not be quick to anger, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Do not say, and this is my favorite verse in this entire chapter. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. So we're talking, so what is he assigning value to wisdom in these remaining verses here in the chapter? Is there something beneficial to wisdom?
Yeah, I think at the 10,000 foot level, is he's saying, engage in what is real. When you're sitting here laughing, when you're pursuing things thinking it's gonna bring happiness, that's not real. Life is hard, you're gonna suffer, but he says a lot of things that gives us hints of what he's shooting for.
Yeah.
The patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. The protection of wisdom is like the protection of money.
Yes.
And so
Very
it
good.
says, guard that, be conservative with it. Don't be engaging in these other things. Honestly, I disagree with him. I do,
Interesting.
because I have to have levity, otherwise I go insane.
Right, so you want the mark.
And the mirth from time to time
Yeah.
makes this acceptable, makes this
Okay, sure.
tolerable. That's how I view it. Now, I could be wrong.
Maybe, but it sounds valid to me.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, so, but for me, that's how I deal with the tough stuff,
Yes.
is to make it small, to make
Right.
it silly.
To cultivate your dark sense of humor.
Exactly.
Right.
So forgive me if I am off.
I think that you're in good company in the. We are seeing him assign some value to wisdom, and the economic terminology he uses, the idea that wisdom does have some profit or even is like monetary benefit, that's a relatively new set of terms that Israel would have learned in the Babylonian Empire at that time. So that also helps us sort of date the book to a later time. But it's interesting that he's basically saying that wisdom has tangible benefits, right? Benefits that are as tangible as money. You think he's right? Does wisdom have tangible benefits?
Yes.
Okay. Like what?
Well, I think it's like you said, perspective. It's a perspective that's broader than my current situation.
Yes. No, that's great.
And at the end of the day, it serves our faith.
Yes, it does. Very good. What else does wisdom give us?
Good advice.
No.
It does. When you. Very good. What else does it give us?
I think of it as being linked to discernment somehow.
Oh.
Yeah, 2 words. It's, you two think alike.
Is that what you were gonna say?
That's a discernment.
She said it.
Oh, wow. Has it been since y'all have read Proverbs? Like a little while? How long has it been since you've read the book of Proverbs? How does,
Not very long.
not that very long ago, so when we talk, when the book of Proverbs talks about wisdom, it tends to personify wisdom, right? How does it personify wisdom? What kind of person does it make wisdom look like?
A woman.
A woman. A woman who, and again, if we go, I'm gonna just flip back here to the gifts of wisdom. Does not wisdom call and does not understanding raise her voice on the height? And I'm reading from Proverbs 8. On the heights beside the way at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries out, to you, O people, I call, and my cry is to all that live. O simple ones, learn prudence, acquire intelligence, you who lack it. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They are all straight to one who understands, and right to those who economic benefits, right? For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her, right? She's personified as a woman, and again, the economic benefits are sort of folded in there. So this is not necessarily anything new that he's offering. This is sort of an old way of talking about wisdom. But I want to tie those things together because it's going to help us understand some weird stuff he's going to say here in just a few seconds in the remaining verses of this chapter. Are there any other thoughts about verses 1 through, oh, hang on, I forgot about 14. Let's look at 14 really fast, because this is also a great verse. So that mortals may not find out anything that will come after them. How does that hit you?
So that.
Ooh, okay, love that.
So that.
So that you won't know, right?
Yeah,
What do you think about that?
I gotta think about that. Putting together, God made adversity and God made prosperity,
Mhm.
so that. They gave us all this in life, this range of experiences.
Yeah.
So that we won't know what comes after.
Right. This is Kohelet's view of God peeking through again. And again, just a reminder, Kohelet's not a happy person about this stuff, right? Basically, he's saying that God is confusing us.
I don't know why humility comes to mind when I'm hearing that. It's like you think you know it all. You think you're not wise. I
Right.
think you got it all figured out,
Mhm.
and you really don't.
And being wise, and there's a clear distinction.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that that's a fair distinction to make, for sure. Because, and again, in the psychological literature, we do research wisdom as a separate construct than intelligence. Like, there's a different body of literature that explores intelligence versus that explores wisdom. And we agree that they are different things. So science backs that up. Gold star verse. We're good. Any other thoughts about this verse?
See, I don't think the author here is speaking simply because that's his thought.
Hmm.
That's an Old Testament thought.
Aha, it is, yes. And it fits in with some of the things or the other references.
That God has done good, bad.
Yeah.
God's the author of everything.
Yeah, and Job actually said when his wife was telling him to just curse God and be done with it, shall we accept good from the hand of the Lord and not accept evil too? Right? And so-
Yeah, and Deuteronomy is the goodness, the blessings are there, but so are the curses,
right,
and they're all from God.
right. Good. All right. Here. Who would like to read for us? And again, this is going to be a longer passage, but a lot of the, don't let it trick you. A lot of the verses in here are relatively short. Who would like to read chapter 7, verses 15 through 29 for us? Okay, go ahead.
In my vain life, I have seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness, and there are wicked people who prolong their life in their evil doing. Do not be too righteous and do not act too wise. Why should you destroy yourself?
Do not be too wicked and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other, for the one who fears God shall succeed with both. Wisdom gives strength to the wise more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is no one on earth so righteous as to do good without ever sinning. Do not give heed to everything that people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you have yourself cursed others. Okay. All this time I tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which is far off and deep, very deep, who can find out? I turned my mind to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the sum of things, and to know that wickedness is folly and that foolishness is madness. I found more bitter than death a woman who is a trap, whose heart is nets, whose hands are fetters. One who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. See, this is what I found, says the teacher, adding one thing to another to find the sum, which my mind has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made human beings straightforward, but they have devised many schemes.
So there's a lot going on here too, including. Right, yeah, very good. So now there is a hard swerve into some potential misogyny here in the back end of this chapter, but that's one of the reasons that I wanted to couch that in the context of the way that Proverbs talks about wisdom and folly. Because folly is also personified as a woman too. Now, we can just address the misogyny here really quick, because we want to bite that bullet before jumping back to the beginning, because verses 15 through 18 are really, really interesting, and I really want to unpack those. Let me read to you the passage from Proverbs. Hang on, which one is it? It's Proverbs 9. This says about folly. The foolish woman is loud. She is ignorant and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the high places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. You who are simple, turn in here. And those without sense, she says, stolen water is sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant, but they do not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. And in other places, it talks about foolish and dangerous women or adulterous women, and how those who are righteous escape their clutches, right? So this is, again, Proverbs doing what it does and personifying wisdom and folly, again, as women, which was a convention of the time. And also, again, there's some baked-in misogyny in there, I think, too. One of the commentators that I read suggested that there are two ways you could interpret this passage. One, he's being a misogynist. Two, he is referring to the personification of wisdom and folly as women. And when he's talking about avoiding women there in that context, he's talking specifically about avoiding folly. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, I will leave. No, no. So it's possible that he is being misogynistic here. But again, it's not that he's encouraging us to agree with him wholesale on everything, right? Throughout the entirety of the book. So if you just kind of want to go and stick out your tongue at him and ignore him on this, I think that that's valid. But because he's borrowed heavily from the language of Proverbs, I have a hard time just kind of writing this entire thing off as just a misogynistic rant. I think he may be trying to be metaphorical here. And I think that he also may not be doing it very successfully. So I leave it to you to decide which of those two interpretations you prefer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Isn't he just reflecting the times? I mean, every book in the Bible tends to put down women.
Yeah,
So,
not super positive.
So I don't think it's any different or any more unique than
Sure.
other things we've read in the Old Testament.
And that's fair too. I think that that's a fair criticism, because I mean, the entire system is deeply patriarchal. And there are loads and loads of issues with that. I heard a gasp, go ahead.
Oh, so if I change the wording a little bit, where am I, from 25 on, okay, or no, 26. I found more bitter than death. The attachment to anything that is, well, if you change woman to the attachment to anything that is attractive.
Right. Yeah, then that makes sense. Yeah, I found more bitter than death. Folly, who is a trap, whose heart is snares and nests, whose hands are fetters, one who pleases God escapes folly, but the sinner is taken by folly.
Yeah.
See, this is what I found, says the teacher, adding one thing to another. And then if you go, and that works pretty well. And then with verse 28, one man among 1,000 I found, but a because the folly interpretation works great for those verses, then you get to 29 and it doesn't click as well. Does that make sense? But he could also be switching over to wisdom as, or you may also be referring to women as wisdom in that sense, because if he says, which my mind has sought repeatedly, I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but wisdom among all these I have not found. And that seems to ring more true to the overall context. So there are a couple ways you can play with it. Does it make sense? It isn't hard and fast. I would encourage you to be critical of these verses and feel free to kind of work on the interpretation if you want to. Any other thoughts on these? Before we jump back to the beginning of this passage, I really want to talk about 15 through 18 really quick. Let's look at 15 through 18. In my vain life, I have seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness. There are wicked people who prolong their life in their evil doing. Do not be too righteous and do not be too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be too wicked and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other. What on earth is he saying here?
Please tell us.
Let me put it to you.
We've been watching a lot of Tudor England stuff like recently, and I just think of like when Thomas More was given the option to sign the oath towards the king instead of the church, and he was very, no, I am gonna be a Catholic until I die, and you can behead me and whatever. And like, this just rings true of like, dude, you could have done a lot of good as an alive person. Was it worth it to have your head cut off?
Right.
There was a lot of that happening in that time frame on both sides of the Protestant and Catholic argument, but like, it does kind of like go anti-martyr here.
A bit, yeah. Yeah, a little bit. Like,
I'm hearing, be a moderate, don't be a zealot, don't be an extremist.
yes, yeah.
True wisdom is a balance, and if wisdom itself could become a vain pursuit,
Right.
where you. But true wisdom, you're more an observer, you're not,
Yes.
your self-worth isn't tied to it.
Yes, completely. Very much so, because I mean,
Otherwise, it becomes an arrogance.
it becomes arrogance and it becomes, I mean, if you're too scrupulous, are you having any fun?
No. You probably can't see him or anything.
No.
Well, I don't think he cares much about having fun.
Let me respect Matt's time here really quick. I think are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I think one of the reasons I think he circles back to taking joy when it happens, because I think he does find value in joy. But he's also balancing that with, yes, joy is good, but I learned more when I was sad. Yes, wisdom is good, but man, folly is like, I mean, if I don't have a little folly in my wisdom, then what kind of a person am I? Like if I'm always just uptight all the time, but at the same time, then he's saying, but also don't be too stupid and don't be too foolish because you're gonna die. which very valid. If you look at the primary reasons that, for instance, adolescent males tend to die, and there's lots of research on this, it's usually due to stupid accidents and bad decisions, right? So like foolishness has a body count connected to it, right?
Have a holly, jolly, folly, Christmas.
Right, very good. And so the verse here where he says, it's good that you should take hold of one without letting go of the other, is he basically saying, yes, seize wisdom, but don't let go of all of your falling? What do you make of that? Ooh, I love the facial expressions that I'm getting. The reactions are like,
Keep yourself grounded.
Be moderate.
be moderate, right? Finding the middle way or sort of the center path. All right, we're just about out of time here. So I do have all these other bullet points. Can I just draw attention to like 19, 20, 21, and 22? They are worth taking a look at because they kind of vibe a bit more with a more traditional Proverbs sort of narrative. But you can take a look at that stuff on its own time. We hit the big points that I wanted to address. So next week, no study. The week after, yes, study. Yes, study. I guess I kind of just don't remember our schedule. What we'll try to do when we get back together is we're going to look at 8 and 9 and maybe take a peek at 10. Just, I know that that's 3 chapters again, but I'm trying to grapple with the fact that we only have 2 more sessions, and I'm trying to get through as much of the book as I I'll keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for warning me about that.
Is pie in between or is it after second service because of the meeting?
It's both.
Okay.
So there will be pies floating around.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so take hold of Ecclesiastes study, but also do not let go of pie. Just strike that middle balance. Let's close with a quick word of prayer. Lord, this stuff is confusing, but thank you that in our confusion, you are with us and that you walked beside us and still walk beside us, and that you know what it's like to be human and you know what it's like to be frustrated and tired and confused. Grant us peace in our confusion and grant us wisdom and discernment and maybe just the right amount of foolishness to enjoy our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
I'm sorry.
Did Siri try to answer my prayer just now? That was.